Okay, so I'm not used to this. This is the first time I'm doing this video marking scheme. Hopefully things are going to work out. I don't feel very comfortable doing this, but hopefully I'm not going to speak too much rubbish. Okay, so this first video is actually on a few elements of methodology that I would like to clarify with you. I think that when answering the questions on this podcast, which consisted of an interview of Tariq Madoud on the question of multiculturalism in Britain, it would have been a good idea to try and quote the actual podcast on a regular basis. So the idea is that you should approach this audio document almost as if it was a text, much the same as you actually quote from a text. You're supposed to quote from the podcast itself. What this means is that when you give a line, when you quote a text, in the same way when you quote from a podcast, from an audio file, you're supposed to give specific timing. In other words, 15 minutes, 35 seconds, or I don't know, 5 minutes, 12 seconds, that kind of thing. Otherwise, we don't exactly know where we are. So it's fundamental that you should actually give specific quotes from within the podcast itself. Let me have a look at other elements as far as methodology is concerned. Well, it's not so much methodology itself as a few general points on the podcast. I think the podcast is not that easy. There are a lot of things that Tariq Madoud argues which are not very easy to understand. One reason is Tariq Madoud is actually trained as a philosopher originally, so a lot of the things that he says are pretty much theoretical, and many of these issues we haven't studied together in class. So I think that's another element. Two or three things that I found which were a problem in a way with either some of the answers that I got from you or issues that I personally have with the podcast itself is, well, let me have a look first of all at a phrase that three or four people among you actually used. The phrase is melting pot. Now you refer to the United States consistently because of course there's a reference to Martin Luther King's civil rights movement, and quite a few of you actually mentioned the melting pot in the United States in very positive terms. Now, the reason why you do so is that, like so many other students, that I really want to reassure you on this, is you completely misconstrue, you misinterpret the concept of melting pot. Melting pot doesn't mean ethnic diversity. Melting pot doesn't mean that you have different communities in the United States that live apart from each other or live at peace with each other. Melting pot is a very strong phrase expressing 100% assimilationism. I think that's fundamental. The origin of melting pot was in the early 20th century. A playwright, a man who writes plays, an artist. His name was Israel Zangwill. He wrote a play called The Melting Pot in 1906 or 1907, I can't remember, which was a huge success. I mean, the play was actually performed at the White House when Theodore Roosevelt was president. And within this play, Israel Zangwill, basically he takes, I don't know, 10 or 12 different immigrants from various places in Europe. He puts them into a huge pot, the kind of place where in which you cook a soup normally. So you bring the pot to a boil with these 12 or 10 or 12 different immigrants coming from very different places in Europe. You stir the pot like this. You stir the pot, you stir the pot, you stir the pot. And at the end, you don't get different ethnic minorities or different specifically different individuals from various parts of Europe. You get a 100% American, a full-fledged American citizen who speaks English, who brushes his teeth, who believes in God, presumably in a Christian way. And then, so what it means is that melting pot, in in almost all cases will mean something that is contrary to what you think it means, and it's constantly misconstrued. And I really want to reassure you on this, because of course, I mean, I hear, I don't know, colleagues or politicians, the media, that completely misinterpret this concept of melting pot. Okay, so this was about the first general point that I wanted to make about your papers in general. The second, no, the second point I will actually make when I discuss Tariq Madoud's reference to Martin Luther King. So I'm happy with this first video, which was really very much about general points.